Your badge is missing. That's the first thing Mike said, half whispered, half accusation, when I passed him in the break room that morning. He was holding his usual stale blueberry muffin like it might file an HR complaint, eyes flicking from the ID lanyard around his neck to the empty spot on mine. I smiled. Just a polite, paper-thin smile. Guess it didn't fit the new aesthetic. He didn't get it. Of course he didn't. Nobody really noticed me when I was there. And now that I wasn't, the realization was hitting them like a moldy muffin to the face. 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting quietly at my desk, third row from the window, next to the emergency defibrillator nobody knew how to use, completing Form 483 response drafts for the FDA audit we all knew was coming, but pretended wasn't. I'd done this dance more times than I could count. I built the compliance system from scratch back when our office was a converted dentist's suite with a single espresso machine and dreams bigger than our payroll. Back when our founder still wore sweatpants and read FDA guidance like bedtime stories. Back when I mattered, I didn't have followers or a curated Slack emoji. I didn't sip kombucha or lead yoga stretches in the hallway. What I did have was a federally registered QP designation, qualified person. For our line of specialty injectables, that meant I was the only warm body legally allowed to approve batch release. I never bragged about it. Honestly, I barely mentioned it. Why would I? It was my job. It was boring. It was crucial. It was mine. And then came Carly. Carly, with her color-coded brand deck and a voice like everything was a podcast intro. Our new CMO, fresh from rebranding some wellness startup in LA that sold mushrooms in frosted jars. She wore confidence like a cape and concern like a sticker she peeled off whenever no one was looking. Day one, she held a culture reset meeting where she asked us to write down our professional spirit animals. I wrote, Beaver, builds regulatory dams, avoids attention, bites when provoked. She said I wasn't leaning into the playbook. I said I didn't have a playbook. She laughed like I'd made a joke. That was the beginning of the end. But before we get to how I went from invisible to indispensable, from overlooked to keynote, take a second to subscribe and maybe tap that little thumbs up. I know, every story says that, but honestly, it helps the team a lot more than you'd think. And unlike Carly's sorority PowerPoints, this one's got real consequences. Now, back to the bloodbath. Within a week, Carly started streamlining departments. Compliance, she said, needed to evolve from a gatekeeper mindset into a permissionless flow state, whatever the hell that meant. I kept my head down, filled out the annual CFR training packets, updated our vendor assurance forms. Noticed her new hire, Stacy, I think, tagging our lab in Instagram stories with captions like science but make it cute test sparkles. I remember the exact moment I knew I was next. Carly had gathered us in the conference room with the flickering bulb, which I'd logged 4 times in the facility's tracker. But sure, let's ignore that. And she said we needed to embrace vibes over vintage. I was vintage. The firing was clinical. No HR rep, no warning. Just Carly in her eucalyptus-scented glory, tilting her head like a poodle on Adderall, and saying, Jessica, you're incredibly competent, but I just don't think you're a culture fit anymore. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even blink. I stood up, walked out, and left my QP badge on the desk, right beside the untouched brand handbook she'd made us all print. My legacy reduced to a lanyard and a laminated lie. What they didn't realize, what nobody ever bothered to ask, was that without me, they weren't just short-staffed. They were legally non-compliant. The FDA doesn't care about vibes, it cares about signatures. My signature. I spent the rest of the day sitting in my car in the parking lot, listening to the engine tick cool and watching the windows steam with my breath. No one called. No one chased me down. No one understood what had just happened. But the system did. The software was already counting down. The facility had 72 hours to input a new QP, or every production line would freeze under CFR Part 210.4. They thought they'd fired a nuisance. Fired the only person keeping their entire inventory from becoming government-confiscated biohazard. And me? I just waited. The glass walls made everything louder, not sound-wise, visually. You could see the way people averted their eyes when someone got summoned into that aquarium of doom. They'd pretend to be buried in emails or suddenly interested in the break room's passive-aggressive fridge notes. When it was my turn, I saw it. The quick glances, the awkward silence. Even Mike paused mid-coffee pour like he'd caught the scent of blood in the water. Carly was already sitting at the head of the conference table, legs crossed like she was auditioning for a lifestyle shoot titled CEO Barbie Meets Minimalist Torture Room. Behind her was her vision board taped to the glass, some pastel nonsense about authentic alignment and intuitive disruption. I stepped in. The door clicked shut behind me. Game on. She didn't waste time. Jessica, you've been with the company, what, forever? Since the Phase 1 trial. Right, she nodded with a smile so sweet I could feel my molars dissolve. So you get how legacy mindsets can sometimes block momentum. I didn't flinch. Is there a specific momentum you feel blocked? She sighed like I'd just made her ruin her manicure. Look, compliance is important, sure, but we need that department to reflect the brand. And frankly, Jessica, you're not a culture fit. We're pivoting toward agile vibes. Flexible, energized, team first. Team first, I repeated. By firing the only person who knows the CFR backend, she blinked. We've brought in someone really promising. Stacy has a community building background and helped organize a breast cancer walk back in college. She's a connector. We need that energy. I thought of the custom compliance modules I wrote, the personal audit logs, the corrective action matrices I updated by hand because the software Carly had optimized didn't support our version of 21 CFR. I thought of the time I spent explaining cleanroom gowning to a junior associate who thought beard nets were optional. I thought of every batch I signed off on, every flagged temperature log I followed up on at 3 a.m., every microbe I killed so the circus could operate. And then I thought, this woman has no clue what I actually do. None of them did. Carly leaned forward like we were girlfriends at brunch. Don't take this personally, okay? We just need to evolve beyond outdated gatekeeping and lean into transformation. I could have said a lot. I could have asked if Stacy even knew what a VMP was. I could have asked if she understood sterile fill-finish environments, or if she thought media fill meant updating Instagram stories. I could have quoted exact clauses from 21 CFR Part 210 and asked if her roommate could spell aseptic. But instead, I just stood up, reached into my badge clip, slid out the QP credential, the one with the embossed FDA authorization code and laminated signature, and placed it on the table with surgical precision. I didn't slam it. I didn't monologue. I just left it there like a curse, quiet and deadly. Carly's eyes flicked to it but didn't register the weight. Thanks for your grace, she said, already opening her laptop like I was a calendar invite she could now delete. I walked out. The door clicked behind me again. This time it sounded like a vault ceiling shut. By the time I passed the hallway of brand values posters, courage, transparency, community, I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but lighter. Outside, the sun hit my windshield just right. Blinding. I sat in the driver's seat and let the ignition sit silent for a moment. Inside that building, they were already briefing Stacy on how to smile through audits and build rapport with regulatory stakeholders. She was probably picking out a company hashtag and ordering monogrammed lab coats. No one knew that the badge I left behind wasn't a formality. It was the license, the only one. Without it, no batch could be approved for market. Without it, every dose they manufactured after 7:12 a.m. that morning, when I dropped it on the table, was legally unsellable. I wasn't their culture fit, but I had been their firewall, and they just disabled it with a PowerPoint and a Pinterest board. I spent the afternoon wrapping my life into cardboard silence. 13 years, gone in 3 boxes. One for books no one ever borrowed. One for FDA binders I'd annotated with sticky notes so layered they looked like toxic peacock feathers. And one for everything else, the coffee mug with the faded molecular structure, the backup charger I lent out but never got back, the basil plant that somehow thrived under fluorescent light and corporate indifference. I didn't say goodbye. Not because I didn't care, but because I did, too much. I knew if I stopped to make eye contact with Mike or glance toward IT, I'd crack, and I wasn't about to give them a goodbye breakdown to pair with their brand relaunch. So I walked out like a ghost clocking its own time of death. The next morning, I logged into my old backup email out of habit. Not the work one, they'd locked that before I hit the parking lot. This one still had account resets, Slack digests, system alerts. Most of it was garbage. A few messages stood out. One was from Mike. Subject line, quick question QP permissions, sent 8:17 a.m., about an hour after I left my badge on the desk. I didn't open it, not yet. Meanwhile, I checked LinkedIn. Carly had updated her profile photo to a black and white headshot that looked like a startup founder posing with invisible product market fit. Her new headline read, Driving Growth Through Authenticity and Regulatory Synergy. Whatever the hell that meant. And there she was, Stacy, tagged in the company's page, welcoming our new director of compliance, Stacy G., who brings her incredible passion for health and people to our mission. She was smiling in a lab, mid-pose, no gloves, no goggles, hair out. Hash girl boss energy below a heart emoji, a DNA emoji, and something that looked suspiciously like a martini. My stomach turned. Not from jealousy, not even from resentment. It was dread, not for me, I was already out, but for what they'd just done to themselves. They'd handed the keys to someone who thought sterile environments were a lighting preference. And the worst part, they were proud of it. Mike's second message came through just after noon. Hey, real quick, who's our current QP on file? We're seeing something weird on the batch review portal. Can't clear yesterday's release form without. Well, I guess a login? No signature. Just that question mark at the end like he already knew the answer but didn't want to believe it. I closed the email. Didn't respond. They had access to the FDA database. They had the org chart. They had, presumably, basic literacy. Let them figure it out. That night, I cooked dinner in silence. Basil from the same little plant now sitting on my windowsill, leaves torn slow and deliberate. I sipped red wine that didn't taste like victory yet, just pause. The truth was, I didn't want revenge. I wanted dignity. I wanted someone, just one person, to say, we didn't know what we had. But they wouldn't, not now, maybe not ever. They'd chosen arrogance. They'd chosen hashtags over hazard reports. They'd chosen Stacy and her wellness podcast over the woman who once stayed up 36 hours straight to track a compromised lot through 6 states and 3 distributors. The next morning, another email. Jessica, are you available for a quick call? Mike again, that same haunted urgency between the lines. But now he copied 2 others, IT and HR. It had begun. I didn't reply, because if there's one thing compliance teaches you, it's this: silence can be louder than shouting, especially when the paperwork is airtight, especially when the badge is gone and no one knows why the system won't listen to them anymore. The first week after I left, the company carried on like nothing had happened. Orders were processed, white coats shuffled around in the clean rooms, and Carly held one of her all-hands vibe syncs where everyone was forced to write a haiku about innovation on sticky notes. I heard this secondhand, of course. Mike wasn't much of a poet, but he texted me a blurry photo of his. Gown up, gloves are torn / airlock broken. No one cares / but hey, free muffins. Production resumed. Stacy posted another selfie from the lab, this time with goggles on, though perched uselessly on her forehead like a fashion accessory. In the background, I spotted a technician holding a pipette wrong. Tiny things, unless you're trained to spot disaster in the margins. I wasn't watching obsessively. At least that's what I told myself. But I did keep tabs. I still had access to some of the supplier dashboards. They hadn't removed my user credentials yet. Typical. Probably figured it wasn't worth the effort. I watched lot codes get issued. Watched shipping windows open. Watched new batch IDs appear in the system with all the quiet inevitability of an oncoming train. Then came batch #4478. That was the first hiccup. It flagged in the system just after the final microbial review. Nothing major, just a calibration discrepancy on one of the fill lines. Normally, it would be flagged, routed for verification, and passed up to the qualified person for release approval. Only this time, there was no qualified person. Not in the system, not on the internal contact sheet, not in the FDA's QP registry. The software did what it was programmed to do. It locked, refused to proceed, flashed a red banner across the screen, no valid QP credentials detected. Batch hold activated. CFR 210.4 compliance triggered. Mike saw it first. He tried logging in with his old supervisor credentials. Denied. He called IT. IT said they'd get back to him. 2 hours passed. He escalated to HR, who looped in Stacy. She came strutting into the lab with a tablet and a venti oat milk latte like she was about to do a TEDx talk on influencer medicine. Mike explained the issue, slowly, repeatedly. Her response? Oh, just override it, babe. This system's probably just stuck on like legacy permissions or something. Legacy permissions, Mike repeated, blinking. Yeah, we're in a new season now, she added, and I swear to God, she winked. We're being agile. I imagine Mike's soul left his body for a moment. Overriding the system wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. Regulatory software like that is locked for a reason. A missing QP isn't a glitch, it's a kill switch, but Stacy didn't get that. Carly didn't either. When Mike looped her in, she responded with one sentence. Just tell ops to keep moving and log it as a workflow delay. We'll handle it on the next audit. The next audit. I stared at my screen, wine glass half full, watching Mike's desperation escalate in real time. He BCC'd me on a message to legal. No subject line. Just a screenshot of the software error and the words. Can we be held liable for this if no QP is currently registered? I didn't respond, but I did take a screenshot of my own. For posterity, I felt sick, and I felt smug, and I hated myself for feeling both. They were spiraling, not fast, not publicly. But internally they'd begun to feel it, the cold hand of rules they thought didn't matter. Of systems built to protect them, now weaponized by their own ignorance. And still, the production lines kept moving. Stacy told everyone the error would resolve by EOD. Carly told the board it was just transition friction. HR told legal that Jessica had left unexpectedly and were actively recruiting her replacement. They were building on a foundation that didn't exist anymore, and I just watched, because they chose this. And the system, it never forgets who holds the keys. The screen turned red at exactly 6:52 a.m. Mike would later tell me it didn't even flash or blink. Just snap, a hard shift. One moment. The batch dashboard showed standard batch hold notices. The next, it screamed across every terminal in the building like a nuclear launch alert. No qualified person on site. Manufacturing suspended. He'd seen warnings before. Everyone had. Temperature out of range, door ajar too long, bioburden threshold nudging the top of the curve. But this was full lockdown. The kind you only see in worst-case drills. The kind that requires reporting within 24 hours to avoid federal sanctions. The kind that assumes your facility is no longer authorized to exist. And all because my login, the one tied to the QP designation, had expired with my badge. Mike dropped his clipboard, literally dropped it. Pages scattered across the corridor like snow in a wind tunnel. A technician nearby glanced at the monitor and asked, "Is that bad?" Like she'd just seen a popcorn machine overheating. Mike didn't answer. He bolted. Upstairs, Stacy was already in the break room filming a morning compliance coffee chat for the company's internal culture feed. She had a ring light, a script about cleanroom mindfulness, and zero idea that the production floor had just flatlined. When Mike burst in, out of breath and half-hoarse, she said, "Can we circle back on this after I shoot my reel?" He pulled up the terminal on her iPad and showed her the system freeze. Her eyes scanned it for 3 seconds before she said, "Is that like a real rule, or more of a guideline?" He didn't scream, I give him credit for that. But he did say, very quietly, "This means everything we've manufactured since Jessica left is non-compliant. Illegally so." Stacy blinked. "Okay, but can't we just hire another Jessica?" He stared at her, visibly losing years off his life. Meanwhile, I was at Trader Joe's, comparing olive oil labels and ignoring the fifth voicemail in a row. My phone buzzed like it had developed a nervous tic. I let it, Mike, Carly. One from a number I recognized as the CEO's executive assistant. I turned the ringer off and added mushrooms to my cart. They didn't need me, remember? I wasn't a culture fit. Back at the office, the 7 o'clock a.m. shift had arrived, and the cleanroom staff stood frozen, staring at terminals that refused to release batch data. Environmental monitoring alarms began to stack. The fill line stopped. One machine triggered a fault state from an activity. The system was folding in on itself, process by process, like a slow-motion collapse. At 7:48 a.m., the CEO walked in. He hated mornings. Always showed up post-breakfast with a green juice and that smug aura of inherited power. He expected another day of progress reports and investor decks. Instead, he was met by silence. Not the quiet hum of a productive lab, but real silence. No machines, no clatter, just the whine of air filters and the flicker of red screens. He found Carly in the war room. She was already spinning it. "There's been a minor technical hiccup. We're working with IT to realign some credentials." Mike was there, arms crossed. Looked like someone who'd just watched his childhood home burn down while everyone else posed for selfies in front of the flames. "The software isn't broken," he said. "It's functioning exactly as it was designed. The problem is that there's no qualified person on file." The CEO frowned. "Didn't we hire someone?" Mike replied, "Yes. But Stacy isn't registered with the FDA. That process takes months. You can't just assign the title." Carly cut in, her voice brittle. "Well, Jessica didn't exactly give us much notice. And we're pivoting, remember? Regulatory modernization. We don't need to do things the old way." Mike pointed to the screen. "Tell that to the system." No one spoke, because at that moment, every unit in the warehouse, every vial on the line, every dose waiting for distribution had just turned into expensive, unusable sludge. No QP meant no release. No release meant nothing left the building. Nothing that could legally be sold, shipped, or even stored without triggering mandatory FDA incident reporting. And still, Carly didn't flinch. "Let's call a consultant," she said. "We'll fix this. Reset the permissions." Maybe Jessica left a backup login. They looked at each other. No one said it, but they all knew it. I hadn't left anything behind except a badge, because that was all I needed to leave. And the system, it remembered what they wanted to forget. Panic didn't begin with a scream. It began with a spreadsheet. By 9:12 a.m., the warehouse team had compiled a batch manifest for everything produced in the last 8 days. 4478 through 4493. That's 16 full-scale production lots, nearly $83 million in projected revenue. Now all sitting in a dark, temperature-controlled vault, humming softly like a funeral procession, no one had the heart to announce. Legal was the first to say the words out loud, tainted under CFR. I wasn't in the room, of course, but I knew the sound of that phrase, knew the way it lands, like a stone dropped into glass. The CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, doesn't care about intention. Doesn't care that Carly had branding goals or that Stacy posted a boomerang of herself holding a graduated cylinder with the caption #making moves #compliance queen. Doesn't care that the CEO didn't know or that HR assumed. The law doesn't bend for vibes. If there is no qualified person on site, there is no legal product. It's that simple. So they did what companies always do when they're out of depth. They scrambled. HR opened their directory, trying to poach a QP from competitors. The first call ended in laughter. The second ended in a dial tone. The third was more honest, even if someone agreed. You'd still need a 6-week background check, FDA vetting, and a formal site-specific assignment. You're cooked. Carly paced the hallway like a shark in 6-inch heels, muttering about brand liability mitigation and repositioning the narrative. Stacy locked herself in a bathroom and reportedly Googled what does CFR mean. Meanwhile, the CFO broke. He ran the numbers again and again and realized there was no insurance clause that could cover a mistake this foundational. They had no compliance officer, no product, and no leverage, so they told the investors. It started as a routine call. Q4 updates, pipeline projections, Carly's slide deck full of pastel bar graphs. But then came the questions. Why hadn't the new compliance director signed any batch reports? Why were shipment authorizations delayed? Why was the FDA portal flagging an unresolved site validation? Carly smiled through it, said it was a brief technical misalignment and that new leadership often involves calibration curves. But one of the investors, an old pharmaceutical bulldog from Chicago, cut her off mid-spin. "Cut the crap, Carly. "Who's your qualified person?" She froze, because that's the question you can't finesse. You either have a QP or you don't. And if you don't, you're not a pharmaceutical company. You're a building full of unsellable chemicals and legal liability. So she lied. "We're onboarding someone now, should be active within the week." The call ended awkwardly. One of the investors dropped off early. Another requested a follow-up with legal attached. At 3:26 p.m., Mike messaged me on LinkedIn. "Just a single sentence. Did you know this would happen?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. No gloating, no monologue, just the truth. He read it instantly, typing bubble. Pause, then nothing. He didn't respond. I imagined him sitting at his desk, surrounded by silent terminals, wondering when exactly everything had gone sideways. Wondering how they'd made so many decisions that felt right in the moment but added up to one colossal act of self-destruction. And still, Carly wouldn't admit it. She held another internal meeting that afternoon, told the staff that this temporary delay is an opportunity to refine our production ecosystem, that innovation often grows from constraint. Someone, probably Mike, leaked a clip of the meeting to me. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, but her eyes looked like someone clinging to the side of a boat she didn't know was sinking. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat back, and waited. Because nothing spreads faster in this industry than failure, especially the preventable kind. And when the FDA came calling, they wouldn't ask for mission statements or mood boards. They'd ask one question: "Where's your QP?" And they'd answer it the same way they answered everything else lately: with silence. The CMO was fired on a Wednesday. Not with fanfare or some big announcement, just a sudden calendar block labeled Personnel Transition Executive Session, followed by the thud of her stilettos disappearing down the hallway one last time. Word spread fast. Carly didn't even get the chance to blame someone else, which for her probably hurt more than the termination clause. They said it happened in the boardroom. Just the CEO, HR, and a printed stack of CFR violations thicker than her rebranding binder. No tears, no tantrums. Just a forced smile, a paper envelope, and the long walk out. She left behind her standing desk, her lavender diffuser, and that idiotic poster she taped to the wall. Rules are just the start of the conversation. Apparently not. I found out the same way the rest of the company did. A mass email with vague language and wishing her the best in her future endeavors, which, in corporate terms, translates roughly to "we now pretend this person never existed." Her replacement was less dramatic. Vanessa. That name made me laugh. Vanessa had been one of Carly's earliest supporters. Back when I was still buried in compliance documentation and too tired to smile during her team gratitude circles, Vanessa once told me, if you smiled more and stopped talking about sterility protocols, people might actually like working with you. This week, Vanessa sent me 3 messages, 2 emails, 1 voicemail, all polite, all increasingly desperate. "Jessica, would you be open to a short consulting call? We'd be happy to discuss compensation for even a brief review of our updated QP procedures. We know how much you contributed to building our compliance framework. We'd be grateful for any insight." I didn't answer, not out of pettiness, not really, but because I remembered all of it. The smirks when I corrected meeting slides, the eye rolls when I flagged deviations, the way they'd glaze over whenever I tried to explain what CFR actually required of them. To them, I was background noise. Wallpaper with a pulse, until the wallpaper left, until the walls cracked, until the ceiling came down. That afternoon, I got a letter from the FDA regional office. A formal notice, not directed to me but CC'd. The company had been flagged for procedural review under Title 21, Part 210.4D. It was what I'd known would happen if they failed to replace me properly. A full audit into QP negligence. The letter was clinical, precise. It outlined everything from the missing credentials to the illegal batches to the falsified override attempts logged in the system. There would be fines, possibly product recalls, maybe even a public letter of reprimand, which in the pharma world is as good as a public execution. I poured myself a glass of wine, something French. I didn't even look at the label. My laptop pinged. "Vanessa again. Even 10 minutes of your time could help us stabilize the site. Delete." Then another message from a junior ops guy who used to snicker when I'd remind people to regown after breaks. "Hey Jessica, do you have any old SOPs or templates we could use? Just until things calm down, delete." Then I opened my contacts list. Years of names, people I'd trained, people I'd protected, people who'd sat silently while Carly dismantled everything we'd built. One by one, I deleted them all. Click, click, click. It felt less like cutting ties and more like pulling splinters from a healed wound. The thing about being invisible is that people only notice when you're gone. But by then they don't remember what you looked like, only the hole you left behind. For 13 years I was the firewall. Now I was free. No badge, no inbox. No more carrying people who thought regulations were suggestions and compliance was someone else's job. They could rebuild the system if they wanted, but they'd have to do it without me. And for once, that wasn't my problem. The first offer came from a competitor I'd tangled with 5 years ago over a disputed API shipment. Back then, they treated me like an annoying roadblock, an overzealous compliance officer obsessed with paperwork and temperature logs. Now, their email subject line read, "Let's talk leadership opportunities." Funny how the tone changes when your name starts making the rounds, not in marketing decks, but in regulatory briefings and industry whispers. Within a week, I had 5 offers. Not interviews, offers, director-level roles, full authority over compliance chains. 2 of them came with equity, 1 with relocation. All of them used the same phrase somewhere in the body. "We've been following the situation at your former company with great interest." One of the recruiters actually said, "The way you let them walk off a cliff without saying a word? Legendary." I didn't correct him. Not because he was right, but because I was tired of explaining how silence isn't strategy. It's survival. The company, meanwhile, was unraveling in slow motion. Their website changed overnight. All traces of Stacy's compliance blog disappeared. Carly's profile vanished. Our values page now featured a long-winded statement about organizational recalibration in response to evolving regulatory landscapes. I read the whole thing twice and still couldn't tell if they were apologizing or auditioning for a text talk titled, "We fired our brains but kept our vision board." But the industry noticed. And so did investors. One of them, mutual contact from my GMP training days, sent me a grainy phone photo from a biotech investor dinner in New York. It showed the CEO hunched over a linen-covered table, face pale, hair suddenly grayer than I remembered. The caption read, "Trying to explain your sudden regulatory issue to a room full of people with Harvard MBAs and Bloomberg alerts? Not going well." I stared at that photo for a long time. I wasn't gloating. Not exactly. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't settle something inside me. A cold equilibrium. They hadn't just fired me, they erased me. They didn't write a farewell email, didn't issue an announcement. They stripped me out of the org chart like a defective part and handed my job to someone who once posted a TikTok about how she didn't believe in germs because positive thinking boosts cell health. They treated me like wallpaper. Then panicked when the walls fell down. Now their pipeline was frozen. Their partnerships were stalling. The FDA had requested additional documentation for everything produced during the non-compliant window, which was bureaucratic language for burn it all and start over. Distributors were asking questions. Hospitals were quietly pausing orders. The same CEO who once told me I was great at the boring stuff now had to personally field inquiries from regulators, shareholders, and one very pissed-off pharmaceutical conglomerate that had bet on their next batch of oncology trial drugs. And me? I was sitting on my balcony with a new laptop and a short list of companies ready to treat compliance like more than a checkbox, ready to build it into the DNA of their operation, ready to listen. Still, I couldn't shake the anger, not the loud kind. The kind that sits behind your ribs like a locked drawer. The kind that whispers, "They didn't just underestimate you, they unmade you." And yet here I was, offers on the table, my phone buzzing again. My name passed around not in whispers of annoyance but in recognition. Because when the smoke clears in this industry, people don't ask who had the best branding. They ask who kept the product legal, who knew what the hell they were doing, and the answer now came in one word: Jessica. The ballroom smelled like fresh carpet and stale ambition. It was the final session of the conference, the one with the late afternoon slot right before the cocktail hour, where most speakers dreaded going last, afraid of talking to a half-empty room of people mentally halfway through their martinis. But this time the room was full. Standing room only. The conference program listed my talk under a modest title, "Invisible Roles, Irreplaceable Impact, the Danger of Ignoring Qualified Professionals." But the attendees, they knew the real draw. Word had spread, not just about the audit, not just about the recalls, but about how it had happened, quietly, cleanly. No whistleblowing, no lawsuits, just one woman walking out with her badge and taking their entire pipeline's legal status with her. I adjusted the mic, looked out at a sea of executives, compliance officers, and legal teams, most of them nodding before I even said a word. I didn't open with a joke. I didn't smile much either. I started with a fact. Out of 314 FDA-registered facilities in the last fiscal year, 78 reported delays due to personnel attrition. Of those, 11 halted production entirely. In every case, the missing designation was the same, qualified person. You'd be surprised how many companies confuse easy to replace with easy to ignore. Murmurs. A few guilty chuckles. I kept going. Case studies, graphs, bullet point list of what happens when you build entire systems around one person, and then pretend they were just a warm body in a chair. I was 15 minutes in when I saw him. The CEO. Alone. He slipped in through the side aisle, hair thinner, shoulders more concave than I remembered. No name badge, no entourage, just him. He didn't sit near the front. He took a seat in the very back row, half shrouded in shadow, like the guilt itself had followed him into the hotel. I didn't flinch, didn't call him out, didn't skip a beat, because this moment, this wasn't his, it was mine. I kept speaking. Laid out the sequence, how regulatory systems are built to fail safely, how redundancies are often destroyed by ego. I didn't name the company, didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew. The headlines had done the talking. During Q&A, a woman in a sharp blazer stood up. "Can you quantify the impact, I mean? What's the cost of firing your only FDA-registered QP?" I paused, let the silence stretch. Then I smiled. Faint, cool, controlled for some companies. About $83 million in product recalls, I said, and counting. A few gasps, one laugh, dry and sharp. I didn't look at the back row. Didn't need to. The applause came slow at first, then built, not thunderous, but respectful. The kind of applause you give to someone who didn't just survive a fire. It mapped the escape route while everyone else was admiring the curtains. Afterward, a line formed near the stage. People handing me cards, asking about consulting, invitations to speak at their companies. I nodded, accepted some, pocketed others. I had choices now. I glanced toward the back just once. He was gone, no apology, no confrontation, just gone, and honestly that was enough because I didn't need revenge. I didn't need drama. I didn't need to scream, sue, or sabotage. The system had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It recognized that I was gone, and it shut them down. All I had to do was leave my badge on the desk. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.